Again. Before we get going, I just want to do a quick introduction to my team. Tony Ignacio, who leads our marketing initiative and whom you hear from often. Emily Hillman's leading our community initiatives. And Sandy is not here yet, I don't think. Emily is our venture lead. Welcome to the call. Today is our second session in the three-part breakfast series. We're focusing on health tech in Alberta. And this morning, I have really excited to be hosting Greg Ogrodnick and Pete Santosham. Greg's obviously leading the charge at Circle Cardiovascular, and Pete's got an interesting sort of affiliation with Circle, which I will get into. So welcome both. It's a pleasure to have you. And we've got lots to go and talk about this morning, so we'll get cracking on that. But before we do that, I want to introduce Heidi Conrad, who's one of the CFOs at Amplify Advisors, one of our partners, who will be doing the introduction of Greg and Pete, and then we'll get into the session. Take it away, Heidi.
Thank you. So as Khaled said, I'm a CPA and a chartered director, and today I'm a finance leader with Amplify Advisors, where I provide fractional CFO services. I can either come in my own with a fractional accounting services team. Through Amplify, we can help recruit and also move into an ERP to really facilitate the growth of companies. And we really do work in that space with that high growth organizations. I have had the privilege of being an InterGen advisor since, pre-COVID times, sort of at the very beginning. And I'm happy to be here today on behalf of Amplify to introduce Greg and Peter, who will be leading today's discussion. Greg has been a former co-founder of Conceptus Technologies, a leading medical media and education company, before joining Circle Cardiovascular Imaging, where he leads today. And Peter has had a career in technology commercialization. He previously was an entrepreneur, and he is now the executive director of USEED at the University of Calgary. And I'll let them take it away and provide some further information.
Thanks, Heidi. If I haven't seen you yet, welcome again. If you joined a few minutes ago, my name is Khaled, and I'll be moderating the session today with Circle Cardiovascular. Start with Greg. Greg, what is Circle Cardiovascular, and what problem did you guys set out to solve when you started the company in 2007?
Yeah, so just a little bit about my background, because I think it kind of ties into your question. I've been involved in cardiology from a business perspective for most of my professional life, and the field of cardiology from a business perspective is a very important one and can be a very lucrative one. But from a clinical standpoint, cardiology and cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer in the world. It's the #1 consumer of healthcare resources, and still the area where there is tremendous amount of research and development, focus on AI and other areas to basically improve the delivery of cardiovascular care. At the center of that delivery of care is cardiovascular imaging, and of course that's the space that Circle operates in. And in the field of cardiovascular imaging, there has historically been quite a number of various modalities that have been deployed to basically determine what's wrong with the sick hearts of all the patients. And those are from the very basics, EKG through to ultrasound or echocardiography. Patients get referred to the cath lab, or they can go for a nuclear scan or a CT scan. And back in the early days, there was a number of publications and scientific evidence that demonstrated that the majority of patients would go through at least 2 different ones of those modalities to determine what their cardiovascular problem actually was. And even after a couple of diagnostic tests, it's still, the accuracy was only about 65 or 70%, so still lots of room for improvement. So then enter a new modality. That was the new kid on the block. It was a field called cardiac MRI. And so it's a field of which, back 15 years ago was really just evolving. And it's really a field of which, Circle was founded upon. And so the vision was, can we improve, healthcare delivery and cardiovascular health by the introduction and deployment of cardiac MRI as the Swiss Army knife of cardiovascular imaging. And so that really was the genesis for the company. And the notion around the actual company itself was really based upon solving some of the technical issues that were present, 15 years ago as it relates to, the rapid adoption of the field of cardiac MR. And so that's the background, Khalid, and I'll pass it for other questions.
Yeah, that's really good. So what was the MVP? And I guess maybe let's talk about the origins of the IP. It's an interesting background as to where this sort of company got dreamt up.
Yeah, so as I said, and through the introduction, we talked about Conceptus Technologies as a company that I was a co-founder of. It was based in Montreal. The company was founded in 99, and we basically built a website called theheart.org, which even today is the #1 source of information and education for cardiologists around the world. And that company got sold in 2006 to WebMD, and that's at that point, I left and moved my family from Montreal, where I had moved to from Edmonton in 99, and came to Calgary, and was looking for the next big thing, and that's where I met Pete at the tech transfer office at the University of Calgary, and so I joined as an executive in residence, and with the mission of finding innovative and potentially groundbreaking technology which could be commercialized, and so it was Pete and Kelly Chernachan who now runs Chata, Chata.ai, and so and so there was just a lot of companies that we looked at, but the one that kind of surfaced to the top was as a result of a meeting that happened with Dr. Matthias Friedrich, who was recruited to Calgary, to the University of Calgary, to start the cardiac MRI program, and that was in 2006, I think, or 2005. And so I met Matthias, and he was passionate about the field of cardiac MR. He was kind of a pioneer in that particular field, and had actually started to build a software, which is now CVI42, with a physician colleague of his who was still based in Berlin. And so when I met Matthias, and he basically, passionate world leader, and so we had a combination of a business guy, which was me, and Matthias, who was the scientist and clinician, and so that was the birth of Circle. And so it really was a company that was run out of a program called Ignite out of the University of Calgary, in terms of the tech transfer office. Was the new company startup. Humble beginnings. I think there was $200,000 in startup capital that was put into the business to basically fund the initial couple of hires, and kind of get the company off the ground. But it was a lot of sweat equity, and so that was company was incorporated in 2007, became operational in 2008, and here we are later, 15 years later, a 15-year success story. So there you go.
Right on. Thanks for that background. Pete, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about Ignite. There's a lot of people on the call that may have not heard about Ignite, and know about the early days of starting companies out of the University of Calgary, when doing tech in Calgary was not sexy and certainly not health tech in 07. So give us a little, run down memory lane 20 years ago.
Well, look, first of all, I think it's important to note that my contribution to the Circle story was a pretty small one relative to the 15 years of heavy lifting that Greg did. It was in the early days, in those first couple of years, but my contribution to this discussion should probably reflect my relative contribution to that that journey. But the Ignite program, I really benefited from that as well. That was kind of where I learned this early stage investment piece, particularly early stage technology investing. It was an initiative that was created by what was then called University Technologies International. It would be the precursor to what is now Innovate Calgary. And a gentleman named Paul Cataford had been brought in, an ex-venture capitalist, and with a mandate to create companies, right? To identify the best technologies on campus. Some of the elements of that, I think today we would classically call that program more of an incubator program. So think sort of back office support, marketing support, business development support. But most notably and most importantly, I think, was the addition of executives and residents. And that's how Greg and I met, was the idea that, hey, we're going to look at a bunch of different companies. We're going to put relatively small dollars into a number of these things, recognizing that, you know, in the early days, you're often trying to reduce technical risk, and less so business risk. And I think that is probably arguably the most significant contribution, because, you know, $200,000 in the overall scheme of things isn't a lot of money, although it is very important in that early stage. But I think it's the addition of folks like Greg to that program, and ultimately Greg joining Circle, that was really the big contribution of that program to the longer term success. But I mean, there's so much had to be done after that. It was just really about creating the early, let's call it, foundation for progress.
Right. Thank you. Greg, what was it like running a health tech company in 2007? Health IT wasn't really a thing that was recognized in Alberta. So you were sort of, in my view, starting on a back foot, you know, very little money in the bank, health tech, Alberta, trying to sell, I believe, into the cardiology clinics, or at least try to get, you know, key opinion leaders from the cardiology sections of hospitals to buy into your vision and have some level of belief in what you can do. Tell us a little bit about how, you know, the first 2 years was like, given all the constraints that you were under.
Yeah, I think the initial challenge, I think, for most startups is really, you have to have the idea. Obviously, you want to have, a product which is important, and people can't live without, or your customers can't live without. But in order to kind of, accelerate, the growth of the company, you need capital. And so the other dimension, which you should not be ignored here, was kind of the dimension around, angel investing and access to capital through, the angel community at that time here in Calgary. And so the benefactor of the Stevenson Cardiac MRI Center, where Matthias was recruited to, was a gentleman by the name of Ken Stevenson. And so Ken was you want to talk about serial entrepreneurs. I think he started and exited from over 35 different companies personally, and has invested himself personally, I think, in over 70 of those companies. He's since passed away a couple of years ago, but foundational in the fact that he was passionate about bringing Dr. Friedrich to Calgary. He was passionate about the growth of the field of cardiac imaging, and particularly research. And so, but as a business guy, his other passion was he saw an opportunity for a company to grow and prosper here. And one of the things that he wanted to do was to make Matthias money, because he thought that Matthias, picking up his family, moving to Calgary, making a good salary, obviously, as an academic, but he thought there was an opportunity to actually get a company going. And so there was a formative meeting after I met Matthias. It was a breakfast I had with Ken over in, can't remember the name of the hotel, over by the U of C. It doesn't matter. But anyway, he and I spent probably 3 hours over that breakfast meeting, and really that's when Circle was born. And what he offered to me was to open up his Rolodex of the angel community in Calgary to basically fund the business. And so I basically did not have a slide deck. I went in and met some of the who's who in terms of angel investors in Calgary, and we were very successful, obviously, in raising the initial seed capital to get the company going. I think the other part of which was formative in Circle's success in those early days was, number one, the reputation of Matthias in a particular field. Number two, there was a tremendous need for a better mousetrap, and so the opportunity to and we had a software which was a minimal viable product right out of the gate, and so we didn't have that lag of a year or 2 years getting out. So in early 2008, we went to the big conference where, basically was a small, very small conference at that time, where the kind of the pioneers in the field were. We had a table booth. We had product to show, and we had first commercial sale, within the first 6 months of the business. FDA approval within the first 12, and so we were out of the gate very quickly. And then the other piece was, my background on the business side is really on the sales and marketing side. And so I really understand and am passionate about, companies when you're getting off the ground, to really be thinking about the commercialization aspect and the direct sale aspect of the business. And so everybody that worked the circle at that time was a small handful. We're all salespeople. And so we were out there generating revenue right away. And of course, then that's the validation of the technology, from the start, which is, to get up and go. The other point, which I'll make, which I think again is maybe relevant to people, is they're looking at their particular market. We were not first in this particular area. There was actually three other software companies that were in this particular space, and so we had to differentiate early, build brand early, get commercial traction early, and build a sales force. And that's the one thing that all the other companies didn't actually have. They didn't actually have a sales force. And so we started small, and we were nimble, and we were global. And global from the standpoint that we immediately went into Europe, because that's where the field was taking off rapidly, and then into the US. And so we were, in those very early years, we were generating revenue from both Europe and the United States.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So thinking way beyond your province to go and find market access, very interesting. Pete, just quickly, you guys see a lot. You still see a lot of companies, that have a somewhat of a product coming out of a research lab at UC. What were the technical attributes, or otherwise, that you thought merited an investment that early in Circle at the time? Which, when we met for coffee 2 weeks ago, you said, I had no idea it would turn out to be so successful. Obviously, in hindsight, you can never know those things, but it must have taken a lot of intuition or some type of insight to write a check that early into a company. So if you could give us a little bit of a rundown on how you guys skinned the cat on this one, that would be very interesting for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we still do the same thing kind of today, and Greg kind of touched on it, like really strong researcher, or a publication or a finding that is really meaningful and differentiable. I mean, we've had some other companies come through, and things like Nature papers can be really impactful in getting the attention of the investment community and things like this. In this case, the attraction of Matthias Friedrich was, I think, a really important piece. In that time, we were exclusively university focused, so we were looking for areas of strength, right? If you look at, so that was one area. The Stevenson's Cardiac MRI Center was very strong, and so I think, and then when we looked at that, what I remember being really interesting, and Greg can correct me on this, is, you had Matthias, and he had another colleague, I forgot his name, also a physician, right? Who were basically taught themselves to code because they believed very strongly that this is the direction it was going in cardiovascular MRI. But I do remember at the time thinking we hadn't seen the emergence yet of CT as a major modality yet. So we were looking at MRI and thinking to ourselves, man, this is a growing field, but if you know much about MRIs, the integration of MRIs into hospitals is not a small thing, right? Shielded rooms, massive capital commitments. And so, as I recall, and Greg can correct me, like there was a discussion at some point about, well, is this something we take forward for 2 or 3 years, and then Siemens or GE comes along because they're not doing a very good job of their own software? But then I think things changed. I think Greg's in a better position to sort of articulate what that was. But to come back to your question, it's what we look at all the time today is, do we have a researcher who has a strong history within the space? Are they either recognized or at the cutting edge of what's happening? Have they demonstrated the ability to secure grants and other resources that would indicate that they have some of the features that we would look for in an early stage company going forward?
Yeah,
Thanks, go ahead, Greg.
And to your point, Pete, in those early days, I mean, there really wasn't a market. I mean, the criticisms, I think, of Circle in those days, and maybe even to some extent today, is, you know, sort of how big is the market, and how, you know, how big can you actually make your company? And so, you know, for me personally, I like these niche opportunities, because you can actually move into the niche, and if you're convinced that the niche is actually going to grow, you can move into it and you become, you know, you can become, you know, the market leader in that particular space. And so, in Circle's case now, if you fast forward 15 years, I mean, we're at like 65% market share, you know, globally, and that's you know, competing against you know, 4 other competitors that are, you know, independently owned, you know, plus the major manufacturers, and so that includes GE, Siemens, and Philips, and Canon. And so Circle is 65% within that narrow vertical. It was certainly, you know, big enough to, you know, to attract the attention of one of the best, you know, private equity firms, you know, in 2022. So I think, you know, the message here is, you know, it's the old Wayne Gretzky adage, which is, you know, you should be looking, you know, where not where the puck is, but where the puck's going to be. And I think from that standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity in healthcare to kind of move into that space in healthcare IT, you know, with the right tools and the right vision. And I do think that combination of, you know, kind of the researcher, world leader, visionary, along with the business aspect of it, is really the, you know, the right formula to, you know, for success.
Right. Well, thanks, Greg and Pete. We're expecting a few more circles in the next few years, so no pressure. Greg, what's the business model at?
I'm gonna need more. I'm gonna need more Gregs. I'm gonna need a few more Gregs.
There you go. It was a few on the call right now, so hopefully they're listening. Greg, what's the business model at CVI, and was there a significant pivot between 2008, your first PO, and the way you do it today in terms of GT and go to market?
Well, well, okay, the business model. So the kind of the go to market was certainly, you know, with the direct approach, you know, it was feet on the ground, even though there weren't many feet, but kind of building the brand. You know, I had learned from the heart.org days that, you know, if you can actually build a brand in a vertical such as cardiology, word of mouth is a very powerful way to get your name out there, and for word to spread. And so, you know, right from the very early days, and, you know, because we had access to, you know, some, you know, early venture money, whenever we went to conferences in those early days, we spent the money. We always had the biggest booth on the floor. We wanted to be bigger than GE, and we wanted to look bigger than we were. And so, you know, we did those sorts of things. And then basically you know, the whole notion was, you know, let's get the top centers in the world using the software. And so we really focused on the highest volume sites, the sites that were publishing the most. And so, you know, kind of that was the targeted approach. You know, the classic pyramid, start at the top and work your way down, you know, to the community hospitals. And so we did that. And again, you know, software, you know, up until even a few years ago was really perceived as a capital purchase, and was typically, you know, purchased as an add-on to a piece of hardware. And so a hospital would typically buy, you know, buy an MRI scanner, and, you know, the GE, Siemens, or whatever would throw the software in, quote unquote, for free. And so it was a capital purchase. And so in order to compete with that, we had to kind of move alongside with that capital purchase model. Of course, from the business valuation perspective, moving to subscription was a big priority for us. And so we've really spent the last probably 3 or 4 years converting our install base to subscription, and of course all new business, you know, over to subscription as well. The other piece of, you know, kind of the go-to-market strategy, or the business aspect of it, was that we basically stayed away from GE, Siemens as potential partners, and we wanted to maintain our independence. You know, one of our communication points to the customers were that we were vendor agnostic. We didn't want to be tied to any one particular software, any one particular scanner. And so we operated in that format up until, I think, 2015 or 2016. So basically 8 years. And then GE came and knocked at our door and said, you know, we don't understand why we're continuing to develop, you know, software to compete with you. And so why don't we just package your software up with our scanners? And so we signed a deal with GE in 2016. And then Siemens knocked on our door in 2018 and with the same proposition. And so we have the two, number one and number two hardware manufacturers, globally now who attach Circle software to every scanner that gets sold around the world. And so it was really, kind of establishing the brand, building the credibility, the quality, the people, the support, the aura around the company that attracted the OEM partners, and now, we basically, dominate in that particular space.
Awesome, great. Well, it's very, very interesting and very unique that such big names come knocking on doors of, relatively small companies. So kudos to you guys. What impact has the Circle technology had from a clinician perspective, but also from a patient quality of life perspective?
Well, the Achilles heel of cardiac MRI is basically time, and the time is either the technical aspect of how long the patient's in the scanner, and then the other piece is how long does it actually take, to do the post-processing of the actual images. And sort of, what's unique about cardiac MRI is it was really the first quantitative modality, so you can actually derive very accurate quantitative measures of what's happening with the heart in various aspects, whether that be function or tissue characterization or oxygenation, scar quantification, and those sorts of things. So it basically had all of these great attributes, which gets back to my initial comments around being able to get the diagnosis right the first time, with one test. But that was very time consuming. And so what we built was a tool that basically got, the physicians home earlier at night, improved throughput. And then with the advent of AI, and we were certainly one of the early adopters of AI here at Circle. I think our first version of our software incorporating machine learning and AI was, I think, in 2018. And so now what used to take a physician where they would have 40 or 50 different clicks or maneuvers, now it just becomes pre-processed and fully automated. And so the Circle software from a user perspective is very much just a workflow optimization tool. That's exactly what it is. From the patient perspective, obviously it's accuracy and getting that answer right the first time. And ultimately, from the healthcare system's perspective, reducing healthcare resources, because if you don't get it right the first time, then you're utilizing other treatment resources, which maybe are unnecessary or harmful in the worst case. And so it's a very cost-effective approach to imaging, and one which has benefits for the patient, for the operator, and for the healthcare system. So was the dream of cardiac MRI back in 2008, and one which is certainly being realized in the field today. Yeah,
great. So you guys had a very, very exciting transaction that finalized, was it 2022?
2022, yeah.
Yeah, with Thoma Bravo. How did that come about? And maybe for the people on the call that don't have the background to the Thoma Bravo transaction, if you want to sort of give us a little bit of a synopsis on that, that'll be very interesting, because that ultimately gave you guys an opportunity to do something next with the company. So you can tell us what's next.
Yeah, so the funding history of Circle, we were basically angel funded until 2018, when we did our Series A. We had Yaletown and Kane Capital. We raised in combination with those two, and then our angels participated in a round as well. We raised $20 million in 2018, and really that money was for basically typical ongoing product development, building the team, AI, access to data, commercialization, all those sorts of things. And so that was a pivotal moment of kind of bringing that kind of capital into the business. Through that, we actually did one acquisition. We acquired a company called CoreStem in 2019 that had IP, which we thought was very important to the company. And then, and so we were, on a good growth trajectory. The board at that time was very confident that, Circle certainly had appeal from a strategic acquirer, or from a financial investor, or for the public markets. And so, we basically just kept our head down, grew revenue, and we were growing, sort of 40%, quarter over quarter, year over year, for a number of years. And so COVID hit, things went crazy, and we began to look at various opportunities in terms of, being able to provide some liquidity for the angels who had been into the company for a long period of time. They'd been in since 2008. So now you're talking 2020, time to pay back. So we looked at the public markets, and so we actually hired bankers in 2021. Went through the whole process. The markets were very frothy at that moment. And we were about ready to list when the market started to cool, and it just didn't feel right any longer at that point. It just, the whole thing didn't quite jive. And so with the board, we decided to not go the public route, and just basically to regroup and see what we could do just in terms of continuing to grow the business and kind of survive those COVID years, because they were challenging. I mean, you get the hospital shutting down, no patients coming in. Those were not easy years in terms of being able to continue to grow your business. And so that was the plan. And then in 2021, I was invited to basically an investor conference in Boston, by a bank that I had come to know, through the years. And it was just one of those, 30-minute bake-offs. You hang your hat out there, and you get companies who express an interest. And so that's when I met the principals at Thoma Bravo. It was in a 30-minute meeting. They got it immediately. And so that meeting was in October. They wanted to get ahead of any other process. They wanted to come to Calgary. They wanted to, get things going, and they were very interested in acquiring the company. And so we weren't ready, to be honest. We didn't have our ducks in a row. So we basically hired a banker, got ready, and then went through a process. We had a lot of interest in the company, but Thoma Bravo strategically and showed the most interest. There was a good connection in terms of the people and where they wanted to take the company. And so it moved very quickly. So they came to Calgary in December of 2021. We basically closed in April of 2022. So in 3 months, we were closed.
Huh, really interesting. So who's Thoma Bravo, just for people on the call that don't have the context?
They're a private equity firm out of San Francisco, offices in Chicago, Miami. They are the most prolific investor in software companies, in SaaS companies. I think they currently have under management around 90 companies that they're basically have acquired or majority investment. They're a multi-billion-dollar fund. They've got numerous funds investing in companies, and your investments can go from in the billions down to into the hundreds of millions. And so they're very, very big and very broad from that perspective. But certainly one of the big boys in the field of private equity and software. Right.
Okay. And how's life post-transaction working with Thoma Bravo? Given they have expectations and supposedly or presumably they want to do something with the company in the next few years.
Yeah, I have to say, it's been better than I expected, to be honest. You hear all these stories about, kind of how private equity, changes the world, and they're ruthless people, and they only care about the financial aspect of the business, and so a lot of part of it is certainly there's certainly a lot of merit to that. But at the end of the day, they're owners of the business, and they provide an incentive structure for for management to continue to grow the business. And they become partners, and they become partners through the addition of what they call operating partners to sit on the board. So these are people that are not employees of the private equity firm. These are serial entrepreneurs, which have probably exited from a Thoma Bravo company. So they sit on the board as my board chair is, I think he's run 3 different software companies. And so you have an operating partner for the CEO, you have an operating partner for the CFO, same thing for the chief revenue officer. And so they bring in outside expertise, of which you have, and they put skin in the game, so they invest financially. And so all the incentives are aligned. And so it's really all about, making the company successful. And so it's kind of the organic growth of the business hasn't changed that much in terms of, our strategy and the success of the business since the acquisition. But what has changed, is the way that they, kind of grow businesses and become successful is also from the organic, but also on the inorganic, on the acquisition side. So we're very active now in evaluating various companies. They purchased Circle basically with the belief that we were a platform technology which they could bolt on, other cardiovascular imaging software companies or move out of cardiology into other verticals. And so, that's a big part of where we're at. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to people, and the people at Thoma Bravo are absolutely first class organization, first class in terms of people that, after board meeting, everybody goes for dinner, everybody has a good time. It's very much similar to what I had experienced when we had Yaletown and Kane, on the board. So I would say, don't be afraid of private equity. Just make sure that, the people fits, the reputation of the company comes in. But certainly, I think, in today's environment, from an exit perspective, if you can find a strategic that's willing to pay a lot of money, I think that's obviously, a route. But the other route is, financial buyer, through private equity. I think also a very viable alternative for a lot of companies who have reached a certain level of scale from a revenue perspective and are not moving away from a combination of growth and also profitability. And so, with that combination, it opens the door to, a lot of, Thoma Bravos that might be out there.
Right. Thanks for that background, Greg. Switching gears a little bit to the people function. I was looking on Glassdoor. You guys are like 4.8 out of 5 for, thumbs up and star ratings for how it's like to work at Circle. Being a startup, fast moving, lots of gyrations, relatively high pressure to achieve objectives. How do you sort of keep people motivated, and how do you find talent and keep them, and make it an organization that people want to work in despite the rigmarole of a fast growing company?
Well, I mean, building culture, takes time, and I think, culture is actually driven by the people within the company and obviously leadership. I think people would describe Circle's culture as very family oriented, and I think the history of the company, is part of, I guess, my style. I mean, all through the growth years, we've involved, the Circle family would be the employee, spouse, children in all activities. And so we created this very tight-knit group of people who were very passionate about the company, and but really, I think, kind of creating that sense of, this is a company that cares, and it's a company that, that is interested not only in what's happening today, but what's happening in the future. And all of that kind of bundled around that is the sense of purpose. And I think you can't minimize that as it relates to company culture. And so we spent a lot of time, we do spend and continue to spend a lot of time just in terms of, communicating and demonstrating to the staff that the work that they're doing is actually critically important. That, if we're creating a software which is used on patients around the world, in life-threatening environments, and so having a software that is the best in the world is something you should be proud of. And so purpose was a big part of that. And so from that standpoint, I think from a recruiting perspective, we have a lot of word of mouth, a lot of referrals that come in, from people that work here now, and they're bringing their friends or colleagues, into the company. And so, again, through the COVID years, there was a lot of challenge in terms of retention. There was, people working remotely. We did lose staff as it relates to for economic reasons. I mean, people were able to work, work remotely for US-based companies, get paid in US dollars, and potentially have other perks. But I think our approach was to kind of stay the course, continue to communicate what the values of Circle were, and to get people back into an office environment as soon as we could. I'm a big believer that working remotely, I think, has its benefits, but I think ultimately from a culture perspective, I think it's difficult to kind of maintain that sense of cohesiveness, the sense of family, the sense of belonging, and the sense of purpose. And so, we've got people back into the office, post-COVID, we're still, 3 days a week, but most people are here 4 days a week now. People really enjoy that that collaboration. If you walk in here today, you'll see people are, collaborating, person to person. And so, I think the culture here, I think, is strong. And I think, we did have challenges, through the acquisition, because part of the private equity formula is there's typically some cost reductions as it relates to getting as profitable as fast as you can. So we went through that. There were some challenging times from a culture perspective. But with time, I think, people realized that really things hadn't changed that much. And so there was, still opportunity, I think, to come here, be part of something which is really important, and to have, good career advancement, and to basically learn and to contribute in an important way. So I think that's kind of maybe the long answer, what should have been a short answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. We're seeing a lot of gyrations in terms of intergenerational. I think we almost have 4 generations now in the workplace, and the tension and the work styles are so different that just that in and of itself can just totally dampen productivity. Paul Sullivan, one of our InterGen business advisors, has a quick question. So Paul, you want to pipe up and come on the call? Thank you. Paul, you there?
Sure.
Yeah.
I am here. I'll maybe even start my video. Hey, Greg, one of the things you mentioned that I remember back at the time being involved in the health tech space was that you looked further afield for early traction. You were successful in Europe before in your own backyard, and I just wondered, maybe you could speak to how difficult it was to sell health tech in Alberta at the time, and whether or not you've seen some changes in terms of willingness to adopt in your own backyard.
Yeah, well, I think, again, in our case, cardiac MR was so new back in that era. There was only 2 hospitals we could sell to. One was the University Hospital here, or Foothills Hospital here in Calgary, and the other one was up the University Hospital up in Edmonton. And of course, with Matthias being at the University Hospital there, there was no way that, the Alberta Health Services couldn't buy the software when you had the founder of the business there. And so,
Sure.
so that was one of our early sales was at the University of Calgary. And then the U of A came a little bit later, but it was more from a necessity standpoint and a market perspective that we had to kind of move outside of the province of Alberta and go nationally and internationally, because that's just where the customers were, at that time. That being said, we certainly have had numerous opportunities to try and leverage the Alberta healthcare system to a greater extent, particularly in the area of AI, would be an area that, and access to data, where, I think there's an opportunity, and should be an opportunity for healthcare IT companies in Alberta to kind of work through, a very defined system to get access to data to actually build their AI models, within the province. And from that standpoint, I don't think things have progressed that much, to be honest. I think that there's still a lot of resistance, and there's still a lot of bureaucracy attached to all of that. And And, you know, if you happen to be inside the system, or if you're a, you know, a researcher, you know, you're treated differently. And if you've got a startup, you know, maybe you have better access to data versus if you're an outside company. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve from that standpoint. But in general, you know, I would say things probably haven't changed that much in the province as it relates to, you know, kind of adoption of technology. And then I guess the last, you know, the last point would be, we just received a, you know, a large grant from Alberta Innovates for the adoption and commercialization of our stroke products. You know, since cardiac MRI, we've morphed into CT on the cardiac side and into CT on the neuro side in the area of stroke. And so there was, you know, some grant money that was made available for the, you know, the broad adoption of our stroke software. So that's a very positive sign of some things that have happened. But I would say that, you know, the ability to, you know, get access to customers here, early traction, product validation, I think there's room for improvement.
Thanks for the question, Paul. Any other questions? Not yet? Okay. Pete and Greg, you know, this business is very, it's a grind. You know, starting companies, growing companies. And InterGen, you know, we're a big believer in, if you've got good advisors around you, the grind's a little less, because you make less mistakes and sort of have somebody looking over your shoulder that can tell you things that you probably don't even see, even though they're right under your nose. Who were some of those people for you guys when both of you were starting and investing in companies almost 15 years ago now?
Well,
Greg,
for me,
first?
yeah, well, for me, it was Ken Stevenson. I mean, Ken's a legend, and you know, his business sense, business savvy, you know, goes beyond anybody I'd ever known before, and so certainly there's that piece of it, you know, but also, you know, your board that's what a boards are for, and so, you know, kind of being very strategic about who you want to have on your board and the expertise that they actually bring, you know, to the table, you know, also important. So, but I think the talent is definitely here, you know, in terms of, you know, people that you can look to. I think the ecosystem here is strong. You know, there's, you know, multiple organizations who are basically, you know, focusing on networking and kind of connecting people, you know, to others who can solve a particular, you know, problem or issue. So I think we're in pretty good shape from that standpoint here in Calgary, to be honest. I don't know, Pete, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, as Greg will know, like it's night and day from where we were, you know, 16, 17 years ago. Like as Greg pointed out earlier, like this idea of creating a healthcare company in Calgary 15, 16 years ago, it was, you know, it was hard sledding. In fact, like, you know, that whole Ignite model we talked about earlier, we had significant designs to try and turn it into a long-term program that would last, you know, 10, 15 years. But the appetite just wasn't there at that particular time. So, you know, my return to university coincides with an ecosystem change that supports this idea that there are companies like Circle in the background, and that we do have the resources and capability to move things forward. InterGen themselves, right, in terms of what you guys are doing, how you're investing, how you're connecting people. So yeah, I'm very positive, and the one thing I've never doubted about Alberta is that should we wish to do something, it will get done. There's just an amazing community. You know, Greg talked about Ken Stevenson. There's just so many strong folks in this ecosystem. Some on this call, you know, I could go down the list. Derek Hunters, you can go down the list of folks that have contributed. You just have to look at the buildings at the University of Calgary and see the names behind them. So yeah, I think it's definitely a different place than where we were 15, 18 years ago. There's a real will, and I have no doubt that, you know, it's going to take time, but I have no doubt that we're going to get there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think
thanks for the positivity. Yeah. What's up, Greg?
One other comment, not directly related to your question, but, you know, when we exited in 2022, you know, the university actually had a, you know, fair number of that's equity in the business. And so there was a fair chunk of cash that went back into the university. And so the tracking of that cash, I think, is something that should be done. I think that the university, should be held accountable for where that money actually goes and how that's actually utilized in terms of, bringing on the next circles that are out there. I think, to me, that would be my desire. And so if the money just goes back into, the administrative fund of the University of Calgary to support whatever, I think that's something it's not the right way to go. I think the whole idea behind Ignite back 15 years ago was that, the equity would then fund, future startups and the whole ecosystem. So I don't know, Pete, if that's something you have visibility on, but it's an area which I think, should have some profile to ensure that, the investments that are being made, through, the work that you do kind of goes back into, the next generation of companies that will be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hijack the meeting, but Greg, as you know, like back in the day, it was a slog, right? Trying to get support. In the last 3 years since I've been back at the university, we now have $23 million of capital to deploy, and I have a team of 10 people that I get to work with, right? So the question is, like, how do we actually, like, where does to your point, the dollars come in? Like, how do we follow them through the university to these pieces? And so where should those dollars go? I mean, I'm a big believer that we have to do the things that we did back in the day with Circle. Find people like Greg, bring them in, help them get exposed, put advisors around companies, invest early. As I said, UC's put $8 million in the last 3 years into probably, majority of the companies coming out of the University of Calgary. So for sure that's happening. I think the actual tracking of dollars, Greg, is where we lose track. Money is fungible, as a mentor of mine would say. Money is fungible. So the question is, how exactly is the dollars moving? It is coming back, though, and it's coming back. This is one of the things I was mentioning earlier. I think that the mentality is for sure shifted. It started with Elizabeth Cannon, I think, Ed McCauley. Has basically stated wants to be the most entrepreneurial university in the country, right? Last 2 years in a row, #1 institution for startups. So I think it's happening, and I think it's an important piece. I think universities have to be part of the development of the economic side of things here in Alberta.
Yeah, great responses. Both of you have been serial entrepreneurs. Pete, you've been in a few, I think, Ignite investee companies and some not. Greg, you've done a couple companies. What's the biggest thing you guys have learned on your entrepreneurial journey, professional or personal? It doesn't have to be professional. Greg, you want to go?
Oh, well, it's, entrepreneurship is something that's, typically, it needs to be in your blood. I mean, you need to be a person who, is willing to accept everything that goes along with that, because there's certainly a lot of bumps along the road, and, it's not easy. So you need to have, ensure that you've got strong family support in terms of managing through all those bumps and the long hours and everything else that goes along with it. But I think just in terms of, personal characteristics, it's #1, all about perseverance. But the other piece is more about people and being able to build a team. You cannot be successful, kind of just trying to carry the can all by yourself. I mean, you need to bring in people who kind of share the vision, but have incredible talent in the areas that they're brought into. And so for me, all through my, career, it's really all about building the right team to execute on. And so, great ideas, great products don't win. It's execution that wins. And so you want to have a team that can execute. And so, I think that's the big one. And then you need to align incentives. You need to make sure that there's enough in it for everybody. And I think that's a key one. And then the other piece, which, I think in terms of the fundraising aspect, there's always been historically, I think there's a lot of focus on, minimizing dilution and the like. And I think obviously that's important, but what's more important is to make sure you have the capital to run the business and to, and to execute. Valuation will come if you're successful. And so, I think, bring in the right investors with the right approach, and they're patient and they really understand the game. I mean, our investors were very patient. I mean, as I said, the early ones were in 2008, they exited in 2022. And I had so many phone calls from shareholders that didn't want to exit in 2022. They loved being a part of the company because, again, we had, the shareholders were a part of it. I mean, we had, shareholders meetings where typically you get nobody showing up, or we have rooms of people who were the angels. I mean, we had like 40 different angels in the companies when we exited. Our annual meetings have almost 40 in the room. And so, we'd have, kind of, they felt like they were part of something that was special as well. And so kind of ensuring that, when you go raise capital, it's great. We make sure you think about them as shareholders and treat them in that particular way from a communication standpoint, and be upfront, involve them and the like. So that's just a couple of tidbits.
That's awesome. That's really good, Greg. Pete?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of echo a lot of what Greg said, I mean, very few companies have died from over dilution, right? Like, but it's one of these, we constantly see that. And so I guess, just from the perspective of investment rather than the entrepreneurial side, because I think Greg said that pretty well. Like the team stuff is still so important, right? It's pretty hard to ask someone with deep technical expertise to carry the skill set that Greg and others bring to the table, right? So, getting that early team structure right. We ask this all the time. It's just a team like, what would you have to believe this could become $100 million company, right? And we do all the same stuff. Like, what's the market? What's the do we have intellectual, sustainable, competitive, differentiated advantage? On that list. But from a team perspective, I think we look for signals that individuals are early starting to put business people around them, advisors who can help them with some of this thinking, and that they recognize that in most cases, they're not going to know it all, and they're going to have to bring people in around them. Like, we'd love to see co-founder structures rather than single founder structures, just because it's an acknowledgement that it's heavy lifting. And to Greg's point, a lot of work, a lot of time, and you need people with different skill sets to be successful. So yeah, I mean, it's basically saying the same thing Greg said, that that getting that team stuff right early. For us, from an investment perspective, we're always thinking like, what is the next technical or business milestone that will attract the resources? And when we think resources, we don't just like capital. We think that the actual people, like, how do we get the right people around this? And so getting that foundation right is really important.
Yeah. Well, that's really, really insightful. I got a question here from Islam. Islam, do you want to come on the call and ask your question? If you're still around?
Hi there. Yes, I am. Thank you for the great talk today. And I just have a question regarding the international expansion. Do you guys have any plans for expanding the business into international markets other than the US and Europe, or this is not in the plan for the time being? Thank you.
Yeah, no, we basically sell direct in United States, Canada, all the countries in Europe, and then China and Japan, and Southeast Asia, Australia. That's where we have feet on the ground, and South America. We have feet on the ground in South America. That being said, we have FDA approval of our software now in over 60 countries around the world. And so our distribution partners, GE, Siemens, basically act as our agents in those particular countries. So, the challenges around, kind of moving into all these different markets is really on the finance side, regulatory side, getting paid side. If you want to do business in China, it's hurry up and wait to get paid. You do get paid, but typically it's, it takes you six to 9 months to get paid if you do business in China. If you want to do business in India, you may never get paid, but you can kind of go in that direction if you so choose. But I think, if you're looking at, international opportunity, you have to just evaluate, from a cost effectiveness standpoint, whether it's worth it. Again, in healthcare, all of the countries have specific regulatory requirements, and so you need to have a very vibrant regulatory team to be able to make all the regulatory submissions. You got translation of software. There's a lot of complexities attached to it. In our case, it was a necessity because we were working in a very deep vertical market, and so global expansion was pivotal to kind of the growth of our revenue over the years. So I think every business is different, but certainly if you're going to move in that direction with feet on the ground, you've got to hire the right people.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're a little bit over time. It's been a really exciting, insightful discussion. So thank you very much, Greg, for your time, and Pete as well. And thanks to the audience for joining the call. We'll be having another call like this on Health Tech later on in March. So hope to see you all there. Have a great rest of the day. Take care,
Good.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.